Reporting in C# has always been a difficult subject. Either the reporting tool is not supported long-term, or it's really expensive, or it's hard to use. The reporting tools from Bold Reports provide a different option. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to build custom reports in the Bold Reports Designer. We'll hook up a sample database, create a table, a chart, and more in our custom report. Now, this video has been sponsored by Syncfusion. I cover the details of the sponsorship in the Intro to Syncfusion video, as well as how to get the Syncfusion controls for free, including the Bold Report Designer. I would encourage you to check out that video. If you haven't downloaded the controls yet, or if you want more information about Syncfusion, I'd appreciate if you'd use the link in the description. That will let Syncfusion know that people are interested in their products because of this sponsorship, which will encourage them to continue sponsoring community content. All right, let's look at the Bold Reports Designer. Now, this is the designer, and it seems pretty simple right off the bat, but at the same time, there are some quirks to it. So let's talk through what we're seeing right here before we start just slapping things into a report. The vast majority of the section right here is the main body of the report. We also have down here the footer, and the footer goes at the bottom of the report. But we're going to deal mainly with this stuff in this main area here. We can also right click and say add header. And if you want to add a header up here, which I think we'll do just for sake of having something here, we're going to drag this on and we'll just say sample report. Just something to give us more information. If you want to drag it around, you can move the box around by dragging this icon. Now I'm going to choose a much larger font. Let's try 50 and see how it looks. That looks better, although I can make the box bigger. And do we like that font, or do we want to choose a different font? Well, there's quite a few fonts to choose from. We could look at other ones like Cambria if you want Cambria. There's also Callisto or Calibri. Let's go with Calibri just to have something different, but at the same time, you can play with whatever fonts you want. Now, I want to put an image right here that we made a company logo or something else like that. So what I'm going to do is click on, actually I'm going to go over here to image. And notice on the right-hand side, we have these icons here, many for database stuff, but we're going to deal with images. We're going to say add image. I'm going to go to the temp directory, I believe, and I have a report icon. Now, this icon I created from Syncfusion. So if we go to the Metro Studio, I'll open that up in just a minute. And the Metro Studio is where I grabbed this icon. So I'm not even sure. I think it was a chart that I looked for. And then in here, it was something like this, but it wasn't. Let's try this one. So you click on it, edit, I changed the color, and I said, yeah, that's what I wanted. And I said export. And I exported that as a PNG. Save will save it to save it for later, open back up in Metro Studio for modification. So you can create a saved group of icons. And why am I showing you the Metro Studio? Well, it's free. It's a great way to create these little icons for your applications. So I'm going to drag this. There we go. Gonna cut it from there and paste it there. So I put it on. There's a couple of little quirks with this designer that are interesting. And one of them is you can't just click on an item and drag it. What you can do is grab the corner and move it around like that. So you have to use that custom drag tool they have there. The other thing is when you're designing this report, don't think about the edges being the edges. So I'm gonna put stuff right to the edge. Normally I wouldn't do that. But because of the fact that this is not showing me the whole page, just the visible or modifiable parts of the report. If we go to preview up in the right-hand corner, preview, we'll see that this is what it looks like, which seems like it's really crunched against the left side. Except for the fact, if we go over here to print layout, the third icon in from the left, that's what it looks like when you actually print it. So there's the report, which is just the content you're seeing, and there's the print layout, which of course gives you the full 8.5 by 11 if you're in the US or whatever page size you design. So you can do page setup here and make some changes, like that's letter, but you could change it to A4 or something else, and also change your margins here and landscape or portrait. So that's the preview, and that lets us see what it looks like as just a report, as well as what it looks like actually printed. Okay, so the other thing I want to do is, if I hold down Control, I can select both of these, and notice how if you zoom in here, you'll see that those two blue circles right there aren't lined up. They're close, but they're not lined up, which means the centers aren't lined up of my two items. So what I can do is I can look at these different controls here. So I can center horizontally, I can center vertically, and that's in the section, but then I can center, or I can come down here to middle and say I want the middles to match. And now if we zoom back in, we'll notice those two blue circles are in line because their middles match. So because both are selected, when I say middle, it goes, okay, I understand what you're talking about. It's between these two items, I can make the middles match. And you can play around the other controls there as well, like snap to grid and things like that. Now, we're not going to create the world's best report today. That's not the goal here. The goal is to show you a few different things you could do with reporting, and then you can go from there. I'm going to try and equip you with the most common things you might do. For instance, we're going to put some data on this report and then do a chart as well. So let's start with adding a data source. So we add a data source. I'm going to choose Microsoft SQL, but we can pull from CSV, JSON, OData, MySQL, and so on. There's a lot of stuff you can pull from, including an API, but we're going to choose SQL. And I'm going to say that this is sample DB data source. For my SQL server, I'm going to say local DB / MSSQL local DB. Now, how did I know that? Well, I kind of cheated. So I have Visual Studio here, and Visual Studio has SQL Server Object Explorer. And in here, I can see that I have three database servers. Local DB / MSSQL local DB is the first one. I also have project models and project v13, as well as an actual SQL server. So with the MS local DB, in here, I have a database called sample DB. In that sample DB, I have one table called people. And if we look at the data in this, we'll see that I have 4 people in this. Now I've created this. It's a sample database with a sample table in it just to show off what you could do. But, any database will work for this, just, to try something out. So since I have that, I can look inside here and go to databases. The drop down here, one of the options is sample DB, because first of all, I said, here's the server name. And then I said Windows authentication. Windows authentication means I'm logged into Windows, use the fact that I'm logged in, use those credentials to authenticate me. That's what local DB runs off of, but you could have SQL authentication, which would be like your SA login name and password. But we're not going to do that. We're going to keep it simple and do Windows authentication. So now that I have a connection there, I can hit connect, which brings up this page right here, which says, hey, the data source is sample DB data source. I'm going to call this data set my people data, because I'm going to go over here and select the people table and drag it over here. This gives me my data to see. I can actually run this I want and see there's my 4 records down there. Now, why would I have just one table on here? In the real world, we have lots of tables, right? Well, yes and no, because this represents one set of data, one set of data you're going to report on. This isn't the same thing as data you might work with in C# or data that you might display in different places. This is data for this specific report. So you probably will not have multiple things on here unless they're in a relationship, meaning you connect them by primary key and foreign key. So people and their addresses or something like that. But at the end of the day, what you want really is one set of rows probably of data, because that's what you're going to show on your report. So I'm going to hit finish. And now I can come over here. Now I have the people data with those things right here in my data section. I can come over to table on the left-hand side and drag a table on. And we're going to move this table down a little bit. And I'm going to ignore the row groups and column groups. We're not going to group our data. We're just going to show all the data in the report. So I'm going to start with not the first row, but the second row. I'm going to do a drop down, say ID. The drop down again, say first name. And the drop down for the last one, say last name. But I'm running out of room. No problem. Right click on the gray area and say insert column to the right. We're going to say state for that column. Now, that is our data. And if we go to preview now, we'll see we have our data on the page. We may want to make the font larger. We can do that. We may want to center this column here. We can do that, and so on. We also want headers for our data. So I'm going to do the drop down here, but instead of selecting ID or something else, I'm going to say add text. I'm going to say ID for the first one. The second one, I'm going to say first space name. The next one, I'm going to say last space name. And the final one, I'm going to say state. Now you may say, well, I would love to have some way of linking those two together. And, C# developers or programmers in general come at this usually with the idea of dry. I don't want to repeat myself. So why am I typing manually a column name when I should be able to pull it somehow from the data? But remember, this isn't really C#. It's going to be used in C# later, but it really is something different. It's a report. You do it once. So manually identifying your columns is usually the way to go. For example, first name, we're putting spaces there. There's no reason to try and do something crazy to get these to line up right. We're just going to type them out. All right, I'm going to select the whole row here for my headers. I'm going to come over here on the right, and under font style, there's two drop downs. The second one, I can say bold. The first one is normal or italic. But for this, we're going to choose bold in the second drop down to say I want to bold my headers. But I also wanted to make this column centered. So I select a whole column, which is both items. And I want to come down here to alignment and say text alignment is center. So now align that. And maybe I want to make the last name and first name a little bigger. That's just in the gray area at the top. You just put your cursor between the two columns, and it will give you that icon right there, that indicator for your mouse, and you click and drag, right? So you can do that to your heart's content, and then you can select the whole thing and move it around. There we go. And move around like you want, all right? So that's putting data on a page. And if we do the preview now, there's our data. Maybe it's a little small, so let's make that a bit bigger. So I'm going to select, let's select both rows. Well, can we do one at a time? Oops, hold. Nope, just one. So let's select the headers first, and we're going to change the font size. Let's change this to, let's do 20 and see, that looks better. Maybe it's a little aggressive. Let's do 16. 16 better. We'll select the actual data rows and make them 16 as well. And then we should probably make each of these a little bigger, except for the ID. The ID doesn't need to be bigger. And we can drag this over where we need it and preview it again. And that looks better. And again, that's the print layout. This is the actual report layout. Okay, so that is our design for our data, but we want a chart. Now, we don't have anything terribly useful to chart, except I have the IDs. And that will give us at least something. So I'm going to come down here to a pie chart. I'm going to drag this on. And of course, it's going to land on top of our table. So we can come down here and kind of move this around a little bit. That looks good. And now we have this pie chart. Now the pie chart, if we select it, on the right-hand side, we have properties and we have data. Notice pie chart's called chart 1. We're going to call this state chart. Just we identify it in the report, which we'll look at in a little bit. We're going to say data. On the data side of things, we have measures, where we can measure values, and we have dimensions. So these would be like your, if you had a bar chart, maybe column, the X column, the Y column, or measures might be the actual thing you're measuring or looking at. So we're going to put in the Y value, we're going to put the ID, which is going to create a sum of the ID. And on the row, we will put state. So what this will do is it will show us the sum of the ID, which of course is a nonsensical number. It's just, has only one per state, but it'll be a different number. It'll show us the sum of the IDs for each state. So if we preview this, we'll see that we get a nice pie chart. And it says that looks like Washington's the largest, then California, then Oklahoma, then Texas. Well, that's because I put Texas in first and notice that Texas has an ID of 1. Washington has an ID of 4. That's why it's the largest. So you mouse over it, notice you get a preview of what those values are. That's how you put a chart in a report. Now, again, this is not the world's prettiest report. It's really not, but it does give you a sense of how you might design a report. Now, let's close out the preview. And I think that gives you a pretty good idea of how to do the various parts. We've got our properties and our data. We've got our properties, and this doesn't have data because it's linked right here and under data set, but it's the same kind of thing. We can also do filters and sorts here. So for our table, it does group everything under properties, but for our chart, we have 2 tabs, properties and data. We do have our data sets we can work with. We can add a new data set down here in the bottom. And if we want to add more images, we just say add image and find it and then drag it on. So, or actually hit the plus button to add it. So, and what that does embed the image in the report, just so you know. So you don't have to keep that image where it was or have the relationship as far as directories and stuff like that. It's embedded. So let's save this. So we're going to save, and we're going to save a temp directory. We're going to call this our sample people report. Okay. And now I am going to open up, whoops. There we go. Sorry, it's off screen for a minute. I'm going to open up the temp directory, and let's right click on our new file, sample people report.rdl, which that's our report definition. We're going to right click on that and say open with code. And if you'll notice, I'm opening with VS Code. This is just XML. That's all it is. So we have our report sections. We have our body, which has styling on it of none. We have our report items like a tablix 1, which we also have our people data, which is a data set. We have the width and the columns and so on. So this is all just XML that you really could manually modify if you wanted to. Now, there's a lot of it. There's a very lot of it. But if you notice down here near the bottom, there you go. Image/PNG, the report icon. Notice the image data. And that scrolls. What is that? That's the actual embedded representation of the image. So this text right here represents the image that we're displaying in our report. So that is embedded so that wherever we move this RDL file to, the image will go with it. All right. So there's also the embedded information about the database and how we connected to that. And that's in here somewhere. But this is just an XML document. That's all it really does. It creates an XML document, which means it's not very big. So, I mean, it's a text document, but this is 61 kilobytes is all it is. So we've created a report, 61 kilobytes. We can now put this on our reporting server. We could use the report viewer to view reports. We can install a report viewer on people's machines and give them this RDL file, and they can now pull up this report whenever they want to. However, in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to take this report that we created and create a custom report viewer on the web. So we're going to give them a Blazor web application that can view the report through an API. So we're going to see how to do that in the next video. Until then, thanks for watching. Thanks for Syncfusion for sponsoring this video. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments down below. I love to hear them. And as always, I am Tim Corey.